The Silent Storm. A story of hidden strength. Prologue. The whisper before thunder. The question everyone asks is, when did it start? Some say it began the moment Victor Chen stepped through those iron gates of Blackwater Federal Correctional Facility. Others claim it started years before, in a small martial arts studio in San Francisco's Chinatown, where an old master passed down secrets that could turn a gentle soul into a weapon. But I know the truth. I was there. It started the moment Victor decided he wouldn't be afraid anymore. This is his story. And mine. Chapter 1. The Iron Gates. Day 1, 6:47 a.m. The steel doors of Blackwater slammed shut with a sound that could break a man's spirit. I've heard it described 1,000 ways: thunder, death's whisper, the end of hope. But when those doors closed behind Victor Chen, he didn't flinch. His weathered hands, marked with calluses from decades of training, remained perfectly still at his sides. I watched him from my position behind the intake desk, pretending to shuffle paperwork. Officer Daniels barely glanced at the new arrival. Just another number. Prisoner 91,842 Chen. 70 years old. White-collar crime. Embezzlement, they said. 5 years. But I noticed what Daniels missed. The way Victor's eyes swept the room, not with fear, but with the calculated precision of someone mapping a battlefield. The way his breathing remained steady despite the shackles. The way he moved with purpose, even in chains. "You scared, old man?" Daniels asked, not really caring about the answer. Victor's response was barely audible. "Fear is just a teacher. I learned its lessons long ago." That's when I knew this wouldn't be an ordinary incarceration. The kingdom of Block 7. If Blackwater was hell, then Block 7 was its darkest circle. And Dmitry the Wolf Volkov was its demon king. 6'5". 300 pounds of muscle and malice. Tattoos covered every inch of exposed skin. Russian prison art that told stories of violence spanning 2 decades. His crew called him the Wolf not because he was cunning, but because he hunted in packs and left nothing but bones. I've seen Dmitry break men for sport. I've watched him orchestrate beatings with the precision of a maestro conducting a symphony of pain. The guards? They looked the other way. Dmitry kept order through fear, and that made their jobs easier. When word spread that a 70-year-old Chinese man was being assigned to Block 7, Dmitry smiled. I saw that smile. It was the look of a predator who'd just spotted the weakest member of the herd. He had no idea what was coming. The first night. Victor's cellmate was a kid named Jimmy Torres. 22 years old, serving 3 years for drug possession. He'd been Dmitry's punching bag for 6 months, always walking on eggshells, always looking over his shoulder. That first night, after lights out, Jimmy whispered across the darkness. "They're going to come for you tomorrow." Dmitry always tests the new guys. Especially the old ones. He thinks it's funny. Victor's response came after a long pause, his voice calm as still water. "Have you ever seen a storm, Jimmy? A real one? It doesn't announce itself with noise. It builds in silence, pressure mounting until the air itself becomes dangerous. That's what strength is, not the thunder, but the stillness before it." Jimmy didn't understand. Not yet. But he would. Chapter TWO, The Test. Day 2, 7:15 a.m., the cafeteria. I was working the breakfast shift when it happened. The cafeteria was packed, 200 inmates, all watching, all waiting. They'd heard the rumors. Fresh meat in Block 7. An old man. Dmitry's territory. Victor entered through the steel doors, moving with that same deliberate grace. His tray held the usual slop: gray eggs, burnt toast, coffee that looked like motor oil. He didn't complain. He simply took what was offered and began scanning for a seat. Dmitry was positioned near the entrance with his crew, 4 loyal enforcers who'd follow him into hell if he asked. They called themselves the Pack. Razor, a scarred Hispanic man with tear tattoos. Bones, a skinny white guy who got his name from the people he'd broken. Tank, a former linebacker who'd killed a man with his bare hands. And Ghost, the quiet one, the dangerous one, who moved like smoke through shadows. As Victor passed, Dmitry's voice boomed across the cafeteria, silencing every conversation. "Look what we have here, boys. Somebody's grandfather wandered into the wrong neighborhood." Laughter erupted. Cruel, hungry laughter that fed on fear. Victor kept walking. His face betrayed nothing, No fear, no anger, no acknowledgement. It was the kind of calm that comes from decades of meditation, from knowing yourself so completely that external chaos becomes irrelevant. Dmitri stepped into his path, his massive frame blocking the way like a mountain of muscle and menace. "Did you hear me, old man? I'm talking to you." Victor stopped. His eyes met Dmitri's, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in the wolf's expression. Uncertainty. As if some primal part of his brain recognized danger that his conscious mind refused to acknowledge. "I heard you," Victor said softly. "I just have nothing to say." That's when everything changed. The moment that shook the walls. Dmitri's face flushed red. In his world, silence was disrespect. Disrespect demanded blood. "You think you're tough? You think those old bones can handle what's coming?" Victor's response was barely a whisper, but it carried through the silent cafeteria. "I think you should let me eat my breakfast in peace." The wolf's crew tensed. This wasn't how things went. New inmates cowered or fought back stupidly. This old man was doing neither. He was simply standing there, tray in hand, unmoved and unimpressed. Dmitri made his decision. He grabbed Victor's tray and slammed it to the ground. Gray eggs splattered across the concrete. The metal tray rang like a bell. "There's your breakfast, grandfather. Eat it off the floor like the dog you are." The cafeteria held its breath. Victor looked down at the spilled food. Then he looked up at Dmitri. And when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. "I spent 45 years teaching young men like you how to control their anger. How to find strength in stillness. But I also taught them something else, how to defend themselves when stillness is no longer an option." Dmitri laughed, but it sounded forced. Big words for an old. He never finished the sentence. What happened next lasted 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds would echo through Blackwater for years. The strike. Dmitri swung first. A massive right hook designed to take Victor's head off. It was the kind of punch that had shattered jaws, broken cheekbones, put men in the infirmary for weeks. But Victor wasn't there when it arrived. He shifted, not dramatically, not obviously, just a subtle rotation of his hips, a gentle sway like bamboo in wind. Dmitri's fist passed through empty air, the momentum carrying him forward, off balance. And then Victor moved. His left hand rose in a graceful arc, redirecting Dmitri's arm harmlessly aside. At the same moment, his right palm struck forward, not a punch, but a push, precise and measured, connecting with a point just below Dmitri's sternum. The technique had a name in the martial arts world: dragon's breath. Applied correctly, it disrupted the diaphragm, stopped the breath, and sent a shockwave through the nervous system. Dmitri's eyes went wide. The air exploded from his lungs in a gasp that sounded like death itself. His massive frame, 300 pounds of muscle and violence, folded like paper. He crashed to his knees, then forward onto his hands, gasping like a fish drowning in air. The cafeteria was silent. 200 inmates stared in disbelief. The wolf, the man who'd ruled Block 7 through fear and brutality for 7 years, was on his hands and knees before a 70-year-old man who looked like he should be playing chess in a park. Victor looked down at him with something that might have been pity. "I asked you politely," he said, his voice still calm. "All I wanted was to eat my breakfast." Then he turned and walked calmly to the serving line to get a replacement tray. Chapter 3, The Aftermath. The Shift in Power. I've worked at Blackwater for 12 years. I've seen riots, stabbings, murders. I've watched men die and men break. But I'd never seen what happened in the hours after Victor's confrontation with Dmitri. It was like watching a kingdom collapse in slow motion. As Victor sat down with his replacement tray, inmates parted before him like the Red Sea. Conversations resumed, but they were different now, hushed, careful. Every eye tracked the old man's movements. Some with respect. Some with curiosity. A few with the kind of fear they'd once reserved for Dmitri alone. Dmitri, meanwhile, struggled to his feet with the help of his crew. His face was purple with rage and humiliation. He tried to speak, but his breath was still ragged, his voice a wheeze. You're dead, old man, dead." But even as he made the threat, everyone could see the truth. The aura of invincibility that had protected the wolf for so long had shattered in front of everyone. Word would spread through every cell block by evening. And it did. Jimmy's question. That night, back in their cell, Jimmy couldn't contain his curiosity anymore. What you did today, is it true? Are you really some kind of martial arts master? Victor was sitting cross-legged on his bunk, hands resting on his knees, eyes closed in meditation. He opened them slowly. Master is a word people use when they don't understand what mastery really means, he said. I was a teacher. For 45 years. I ran 3 schools in San Francisco. I taught teenagers how to defend themselves. I taught police officers. I taught anyone who wanted to learn that true strength doesn't come from violence. It comes from knowing when violence is necessary and when it's not. But you hurt him. You put Dmitri on the ground like he was nothing. I defended myself, Victor corrected gently. There's a difference. I didn't injure him. I didn't break anything. I simply disrupted his ability to attack. The technique I used, it stops the breath, confuses the nervous system, but causes no permanent damage. It's a defense, not a weapon. Jimmy was quiet for a long moment, processing this. He's going to come for you again, Jimmy finally said, his voice heavy with worry. Him and his whole crew. They can't let what happened today stand. It makes them look weak. I know, Victor replied simply. Aren't you scared? Victor closed his eyes again, settling back into meditation. Fear is information, Jimmy. It tells you to be prepared. But it doesn't have to control your actions. The storm is coming. I can feel it building. But storms pass. They always do. The question is whether you stand firm or let yourself be swept away. In the darkness, Jimmy whispered, I've never met anyone like you. Victor's response was barely audible. You've never needed to. Until now. Chapter 4, The Gathering Storm. Day 3, The Recruitment. Dmitri spent the next 24 hours building an army. I watched it happen from my position in the guard tower. Dmitri moved through the prison like a general rallying troops, calling in every favor he'd accumulated over 7 years of brutal rule. He promised territory. He promised commissary money. He promised revenge. The names he recruited read like a roster of Blackwater's most dangerous inmates. Cruz Martinez from the Latin Kings. A man who'd killed 3 people in a single prison fight. Jackson Hooks Williams from the Aryan Brotherhood. They called him Hooks because of what he did to his victims with homemade weapons. Malik Jones and his crew from the Black Guerrilla family. 5 men who moved as one unit, coordinated and deadly. Even members of rival gangs who normally would kill each other on sight were setting aside their hatred for a chance to be part of what Dmitri was calling the biggest takedown in Blackwater history. By the end of the day, Dmitri had assembled a force of 30 men. 30 of the most violent, dangerous inmates in the facility. All focused on one target, a 70-year-old man who'd humiliated their leader in front of everyone. I knew I should report it. But prison politics are complicated. Sometimes you look the other way. Sometimes you let inmates solve their own problems. Sometimes you're a coward. The library sanctuary. Victor spent his days in the library. It was the quietest place in Blackwater. Rows of donated books, a few study tables, and Mrs. Patricia Morrison, the librarian who'd worked there for 20 years. She was a small woman in her 60s, gray hair pulled back in a bun, glasses perched on her nose. She'd seen more violence than most correctional officers, but she maintained her tiny sanctuary with fierce determination. On the 3rd day, she found Victor reading a worn copy of the Tao Te Ching in his usual corner, back to the wall, clear view of all entrances. You're different from the others, she observed, settling into the chair across from him. We are all different, Mrs. Morrison. Prison just strips away the pretenses that hide those differences. I've heard the rumors. About what happened in the cafeteria. About what Dmitri is planning. Victor didn't look up from his book. Rumors are like storms. They build in intensity, but eventually they must break. This isn't a metaphor, Mr. Chen. 30 men. Maybe more. They're coming for you. Now Victor looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a calm that was almost unsettling. I know. I've known since the moment I defended myself in the cafeteria. Every action has consequences. I chose to stand my ground, and now I'll face what comes from that choice. You could request protective custody. Transfer to another facility. There are options. Running doesn't solve problems. It just moves them somewhere else. If I run now, I'll spend the rest of my sentence looking over my shoulder. Better to face it here, On my terms. Mrs. Morrison studied him for a long moment. You're not afraid, are you? I've been afraid many times in my life, Victor replied. Fear is natural. But I learned long ago that fear and action are independent. You can be afraid and still do what needs to be done. That's not bravery, it's simply understanding that some things are worth standing for, regardless of the cost. She left him then, but I saw her go straight to the warden's office. She tried. She really did. But the warden didn't listen. Prison politics. Let them sort it out themselves. Chapter 5, The Eye of the Storm. Day 4, 3:17 p.m., the yard. Recreation time. 200 inmates scattered across the concrete yard. Basketball courts. Weight benches. Clusters of men standing in tight groups, the social geography of prison politics made visible. I was in the North Tower, watching through binoculars. Standard procedure. But today felt different. The air was charged with anticipation, like the moments before a lightning strike. Victor was alone near the far wall, moving through what looked like a slow dance. His arms swept through the air in graceful arcs. His feet shifted in deliberate patterns. Tai Chi, I later learned. An ancient martial art that looked like meditation in motion. Dmitri and his army had gathered near the basketball courts. 30 men. All watching Victor. All waiting for the signal. Jimmy Torres was nearby, his face pale with fear. He tried to warn Victor to stay in his cell, but the old man had insisted on his routine. Routine is what keeps us human, he'd said. The moment I let fear dictate my actions is the moment I become a prisoner in truth, not just in body. At 3:17 p.m., Dmitri gave the nod. And hell broke loose. The assault. They came from 3 directions, a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm through sheer numbers. 10 men from the east. 10 from the west. 10 from the south, with Dmitri and his core crew bringing up the rear. I keyed my radio, shouting for backup. But we were understaffed. It would take minutes for enough guards to arrive. Minutes Victor didn't have. The first wave reached him, Hooks Williams leading, a sharpened piece of metal clutched in his fist. What happened next? I've watched on security footage 100 times, and I still can't fully believe it. Victor's Tai Chi movements didn't stop, they simply accelerated. The graceful dance became something else entirely. His hand rose to meet Hook's stabbing motion, redirecting the weapon's path with a circular movement that turned the attacker's own momentum against him. Hooks stumbled past, off balance, and Victor's elbow found his kidney with surgical precision. The big man dropped like a puppet with cut strings. 2 more came from his left. Victor spun, impossibly fast for a 70-year-old man, his legs sweeping out low. The first attacker's feet went out from under him. As he fell, Victor's palm struck upward, catching the second man in the solar plexus. Both went down gasping. The yard had gone silent except for the sounds of combat, grunts of effort, the impact of strikes, bodies hitting concrete. Victor moved like water flowing around stones. Every attack met empty space. Every attacker found themselves redirected, off balance, vulnerable. And when Victor struck back, it was with precision that came from decades of practice. Pressure points, nerve clusters, joints. He wasn't trying to injure permanently. He was simply ending each threat as efficiently as possible. Cruz Martinez, the Latin King's enforcer, charged with a homemade knife. Victor sidestepped, caught Cruz's wrist, twisted, and the weapon clattered away. A strike to the elbow, another to the back of the knee, and Cruz was down. Malik Jones and his crew tried to surround him, coordinated and professional. But Victor's awareness was absolute. He seemed to know where each attacker was without looking, moving in patterns that kept them interfering with each other, turning their numbers into a liability rather than an advantage. In 90 seconds, 20 men were down or backing away, clutching injuries, their confidence shattered. The final stand. That's when Dmitri finally stepped in. The wolf, his pride destroyed, his army scattered, his reputation in ruins. He had nothing left to lose. He came at Victor with pure rage, no technique, no strategy, just 300 pounds of fury and muscle. Victor stood his ground. The first punch, Victor slipped inside, too close for the blow to land with force. The second, he stepped back, the fist whistling past his face by inches. Dmitri grabbed for him, trying to use his size advantage. Victor didn't resist. He went with the motion, used it, and suddenly Dmitri was flying through the air, his own momentum turned against him. He crashed to the concrete hard enough that I heard the impact from the tower. Victor stood over him, breathing heavy now, the first sign of exertion I'd seen. His orange jumpsuit was torn. Blood, not his own, streaked across his shoulder. But he was standing. Around him, 30 men lay groaning or stumbling away. The biggest prison assault in Blackwater's history, ended by one elderly man who'd simply refused to be a victim. Victor looked down at Dmitri, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the silent yard. You wanted a fight. I gave you a lesson. True strength isn't about domination. It's about discipline. Control. Knowing when to act and when to show mercy. He turned and walked away, moving through a sea of inmates who parted before him with something close to reverence. By the time guards arrived, riot gear ready, the fight was over. They found 30 injured inmates and one 70-year-old man sitting calmly against the wall, waiting to be taken to isolation. Epilogue, after the storm. 7 days later. Victor spent a week in isolation. Standard procedure after any major incident. But something changed in those 7 days. The warden reviewed the security footage. All of it. He saw an elderly man attacked by 30 violent criminals. He saw that same man defend himself without causing permanent injury to anyone. He saw the most coordinated prison assault in facility history end without a single death, without a single critical injury. When Victor emerged from isolation, Blackwater was different. Dmitri had been transferred to another facility. His crew, scattered. The power structure that had ruled through fear for 7 years was gone. In its place, something unexpected emerged. Victor started teaching. 3 times a week in the library, he offered classes. Not in violence, in discipline. Control. Meditation. The principles that had sustained him through decades of teaching and 5 years of incarceration. Jimmy's transformation. Jimmy Torres was his first student. The scared kid who'd cowered in their cell for months found something in Victor's teachings. Not just fighting skills, though he learned those too, but confidence. Self-respect. The understanding that strength comes from within, not from dominating others. On the day of Jimmy's release, I watched them say goodbye. Victor pressed a small book into the young man's hands, a copy of the Tao Te Ching, the same one he'd been reading in the library. Remember, Victor said, the strongest trees don't resist the storm. They bend with it, roots deep, knowing that storms pass but the tree remains. Jimmy had tears in his eyes. You saved my life. No, Victor replied with a small smile. You saved your own life. I just showed you it was possible. My confession. I need to tell you something. Something I should have admitted from the beginning. My name is David Richardson. I've been a correctional officer at Blackwater for 12 years. And I'm a coward. I watched Dmitri terrorize inmates for years. I looked the other way because it was easier. I let a system of violence and fear continue because speaking up would have complicated my life. When I learned about the planned attack on Victor, I could have stopped it. One phone call. One report. But I didn't. I told myself it was prison politics, that inmates needed to sort things out themselves. The truth is, I was afraid. Victor Chen taught me something important. The difference between being unable to act and choosing not to. I was capable all along. I just chose convenience over courage. After Victor's incident, I filed my report. Every detail. Every moment I'd looked the other way. Every time Dmitri had hurt someone while I watched. It cost me my job. But Victor was right about something else too. Some things are worth standing for, regardless of the cost. I testified at the inquiry. 3 guards were fired. The warden resigned. Blackwater implemented new protocols. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a start. The final lesson. Victor served 4 years of his 5-year sentence. Good behavior. Rehabilitation programs. His teaching classes became officially sanctioned, part of the facility's education offerings. On his last day, I was there. Not as a guard, I'd lost that job, but as a visitor. Someone who needed to say thank you. We sat in the visiting room, sunlight streaming through barred windows. I never thanked you, I said. For what you did. Not just defending yourself, but for showing the rest of us what courage actually looks like. Victor smiled, a genuine smile, warm and kind. Courage isn't the absence of fear, David. It's acting despite it. You were afraid to speak up for years. But when the moment came, you did. That's all anyone can ask. What will you do now? I asked. After everything that happened here? Same thing I did before, he said. I'll teach. I'll help people understand that violence is never the first answer, but sometimes it's necessary to defend yourself and others. I'll show them that true strength doesn't come from dominating others, it comes from mastering yourself. He stood, gathering his few belongings. And David? Never forget, we all have storms inside us. The question isn't whether they'll come. The question is whether we'll let them destroy us or teach us to be stronger. I watched him walk out those iron gates the same way he'd walked in, head high, shoulders straight, moving with quiet dignity that no prison could break. The legacy. 3 years have passed since Victor Chen left Blackwater. His classes continue, taught by inmates he trained. The culture of violence that defined Block 7 for so long has been replaced by something different. Not perfect, never perfect in a place like that, but better. Jimmy Torres got a job at a community center, teaching kids self-defense. He carries that worn copy of the Tao Te Ching everywhere. I work security at a hospital now. Better hours. Better pay. But more importantly, I work somewhere that I can make a difference without compromising my conscience. Victor? He reopened his martial arts schools in San Francisco. 3 locations. Growing waiting lists. But he doesn't just teach fighting anymore. He teaches discipline, respect, control, the same lessons he shared with inmates in a concrete hell. Last month, I visited him. His studio is in Chinatown, 3 floors above a restaurant that smells like ginger and garlic. The walls are covered with certificates, photos of students, ancient Chinese scrolls with wisdom written in elegant calligraphy. We drank tea and talked about Blackwater. About how one man's refusal to be a victim changed dozens of lives. About how standing your ground sometimes means the difference between surviving and truly living. As I was leaving, I asked him one final question. Do you regret it? Any of it? The confrontation, the fight, the time in isolation. He was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the San Francisco skyline. Regret is for people who don't understand that every moment teaches us something, he finally said. I went to prison a teacher. I left prison having learned the most important lesson of my life, that strength without compassion is just violence, but compassion without strength is just vulnerability. You need both. Always both. I think about that conversation often now, when I'm faced with difficult choices. When fear tells me to look away, to stay silent, to let injustice continue because fighting it is hard. And I remember Victor Chen, 70 years old, standing alone against 30 violent men, teaching them the most important lesson any of them would ever learn. The end. Author's note. This story was inspired by the principle that true strength doesn't need to advertise itself. Throughout history, the most dangerous people have often been those who appeared least threatening, masters of martial arts who spent decades perfecting techniques that could end a fight in seconds, but who chose peace until the moment violence became unavoidable. Victor Chen represents something we rarely see in popular culture, an older person whose power comes not from physical dominance, but from decades of discipline, training, and wisdom. His story reminds us that age doesn't equal weakness, it often brings a depth of skill and understanding that youth cannot match. But more importantly, this story is about choices. David Richardson's journey from complicit bystander to active participant in justice. Jimmy Torres's transformation from victim to teacher. Even Dmitri's fall from power, which ultimately opened space for something better to emerge. We all face moments when we must choose. Do we stand up or stay silent? Do we act despite our fear or let fear control our actions? Do we use our strength to harm or to protect? Victor chose to stand. And in doing so, he showed everyone around him that it was possible. That's the real lesson. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be a victim. Not through violence, but through unshakable inner strength. The storm will come. The question is whether you'll stand firm or be swept away.